It's wonderful to be here on behalf of the small but mighty Ministry for Regulation. I understand it is the third smallest ministry in the government by numbers, certainly the smallest of the central agencies, and yet it has a very important job. If you look at the activities of government, all of it can ultimately be divided down into just two activities. One is taxing citizens' money and applying it to purposes it deems appropriate for the public good, and the other is placing restrictions on the use and exchange of the private property that it has not already expropriated through the process of taxing and spending. When it comes to taxing and spending, as evidenced by this committee and the annual review process we're going through, I think we have very good oversight of what government taxes money for, how it applies the spending and what sort of results it gets. And while we can all have different views and disagree about whether particular expenditures or taxes are appropriate, we're at least informed in how we do so. When it comes to the restrictions that government places on the use and exchange of property through various regulations and laws and so on, I don't believe that we have had the level of transparency or scrutiny that we need. And as a result, excessive regulation has led to a number of costs on New Zealanders. One is the immediate cost of compliance and administration for activities that go ahead. Another is the opportunity cost of activities that do not occur because people are afraid of that first type of cost. But the third is a more profound type of cost, which is the gradual erosion of our pioneering spirit as people see organisations that are gradually driven back and discouraged from taking risks and making the most of opportunities, decide that actually maybe it's just not worth giving it another go. Those three costs, I believe, are very serious for our country. And that's why I believe that the Ministry for Regulation, its minister, at this time me, and the Regulatory Standards Bill form an important parallel to the infrastructure government has around monitoring, taxing and spending. That is a Minister of Finance, Treasury and a Public Finance Act. This means that ultimately voters find themselves better informed and better able to judge whether those elected in government are doing a good job to ensure that the rules put in place, the restrictions on the use and exchange of property, actually are made in the public interest, the least cost and best way for those restrictions to be made, and that we genuinely do have the best public policy in the world so that people can live longer, happier and healthier lives. I just want to quickly introduce two people who I know have appeared before the committee, even I think this week, Grania Moss, the Chief Executive, and Andrew, our Chief Legal Advisor. I'm very proud of the very high quality people who have stepped up to become employees of the Ministry for Regulation in its initial year. And today we're going to talk about some of the very real differences that having a Ministry for Regulation has made for New Zealanders, even in the less than 1 year that it has had an actually fully funded fiscal year under the budget. So thank you very much for those that have listened politely, and I look forward to answering further questions.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. You gave in good faith you're going to give some leeway to the opposition, and before the minister had finished, we heard a rather unparliamentary outburst from Dr. Deborah Russell. I just wonder if that's the standard that we're going to expect before the questions have even started.
Well, no, the opposition have given me the undertaking that the disorderly will not break out, and if it does, then we'll have to revert to standing orders and speaking rules. So I'm sure we won't, but fair point.
I'm sorry, what was the unparliamentary outburst? Would Deborah Russell
it was something I should have kept under my breath.
Well, just tell people would like to know.
I believe I said for fuck's sakes in response to something you said. It was unparliamentary and I shouldn't have said it.
Well, that's the standard of the Labor Party. They're swearing already.
So, Dr. Russell, you've withdrawn and apologised for that comment?
I have.
Okay. Let's move on. Dr. Duncan Webb.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. And I'm interested in your in running the kind of ruler, your own ruler of costs and benefits over the ministry itself. It's had 17 million this year, 18 million next year, rising to 22 million in total. Internationally, that's a lot of money to spend on this function. Office of Best Practice Regulation in Australia has a $5 million budget. Even the United States Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, which does exactly the same role, central oversight of federal regulations, cost benefit analysis and regulatory reviews, has between 12 and 15 million US for a federal government. I'm just perplexed as to why we can't do things a little more efficiently here in New Zealand.
Well, I suspect it's that they haven't delivered the level of benefits that the Ministry for Regulation has delivered, even in the short time that it's existed. I mean, I'll give you one example. We have had modelled the potential impacts of the agricultural and horticultural sector review. If it was to halve the time taken to consent new products, then the net present benefit, the net present value, of faster consenting to the New Zealand economy would be 272 million. So you go through it, I mean, 16, 18, 20, 22, you've got an average of 19 million. That one sector review, which is one of 4 done each year, sector reviews being about a third of the ministry's overall job, will pay for the ministry for the next,
well, that's not the question,
10 years.
My question was a comparative question, and it was look overseas and see comparator institutions. Now, have you looked overseas? Are you benchmarking yourself against overseas institutions? I'll get to the agricultural review later, but are you benchmarking yourselves on international performance measures?
Well, you'd need a comparison to what benefits those other institutions have delivered. If you're prepared to supply that, then we can have a conversation. But so far as I'm aware, that data is not available.
Okay, so you're not looking overseas and the chief executive might want to respond, but if you're not, what I've got so far is you're not looking overseas to see what your overseas comparators are doing and how they're doing it and how they're doing it for about a quarter of the price.
Well, actually, the point is that they're not doing it. What they're doing is quite different, and they're not achieving the same benefits that we are. Therefore, we don't believe that the comparison is valid.
Well, in terms of the benefits you are achieving, I want to get to the regulatory reviews later, but in terms of improving the quality of material going through the House, there's been no tangible benefit that I can see. And in fact, if you look at the quality of regulatory impact statements, including the quality of regulatory impact statements coming from ministries with ACT members, they're falling woefully short. Gun reform, treaty principles, pay equity. Where are the reports from the Ministry for Regulation on those regulatory impact statements?
Well, the view I take is that the regulatory impact statements have not been performing for quite some time. There is a plan in place to improve those, and it goes like this. We are adopting new policy as a government under the Regulatory Standards Bill that we will have a new set of criteria or principles against which...
Well, hang on. The mission of the department started a year ago. I mean, you said yourself that in respect of pay equity, you didn't need to consult on it. Now, that's a total contravention of your own principles. Surely you don't think it appropriate that we don't consult on things that don't involve private property?
I beg your pardon?
Well, you said in the media that it was unnecessary to consult on pay equity because it didn't affect private property rights.
No, I've never said that.
On Guy and Espina, you said, when asked why you didn't consult, you said it didn't interfere with the free use and exchange of property.
No, I haven't said that. What I have said is that we are reducing the restrictions on people's use and exchange of property. The purpose of the Ministry for Regulation is to ensure that if the government is going to place new or greater restrictions on people's freedom, then those should be justified. However, if we are reducing the number of restrictions on people's freedom,
Why have we seen
then
no
that requires
improvement?
less justification.
Why have we seen no improvement in regulatory quality, notwithstanding your ministry's been in place for in excess of a year?
Well, as I explained in my answer to your initial question, there is a process in place. Passing the regulatory standards bill is critical to that. That is well underway, and I understand the committee's going to have a good
So for
opportunity.
$17 million, we've got nothing.
Well, no, because as I answered in one of your previous questions, we've already begun a process of regulatory sector reviews, which have already saved New Zealand far more money than the ministry has cost by a large
That's
factor.
moot.
Okay, I'm going to go to.
Well, excuse me, Mr. Chair. If somebody gives an answer, they should be taken at their word. Now, we've already had one Labor member swearing. We've now got another one who asked a question and then says, oh, that's moot in response to an answer. I think we need to operate in a bit of better faith on this committee.
No, I'm sorry, but I will respond to that. I do want to ask questions around that because it's very much up in the air as to what the benefits from your agricultural review are and the quality of the analysis that underpinned it. Let's get to that later.
Well, you're welcome to ask questions, but
Yes,
there's
and
no
I'll
point.
ask them in a themed manner. So we'll get to
There's
that.
no point in
Okay.
asking
No, that's
questions
good.
if you just criticise the answer as being dishonest or misleading.
Yeah, no,
I said it's
that's
moot,
good.
not dishonest.
Dr. Webb's had 8 questions is what I've counted so far. So that's sustained questioning for you. Francisco Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to sub off the primary line of questioning that Dr. Duncan Webb asked, which was around the budget for the Ministry for Regulation. Now, the briefing we've just had from the OAG says that the Ministry for Regulation
I'm sorry, from the,
Office of Auditor General
oh, sorry, yes.
suggests that says that the Ministry for Regulation overspent its budget by 0.9 million. What is the level of financial control in this ministry?
Well, if you think about that, even if we take that as being true,
But it was budgeted at 16 million last year and it spent 16.9 million. How is it not true?
Okay, good.
well, let's take it as true.
Yes.
So we're doing that. And then we say, okay, you've got a startup ministry that is transferring money between different financial years, but actually remaining well within its budget over the 4-year period, and has managed to stay within, well, help me, about 5.5% in its first year, which we made up in its second year. So I would say that's quite normal in any organisation's budgeting, and it shows very tight control in answer to your question.
Isn't part of the reason why it stayed within its budget is that it's essentially been guaranteed funding increases year on year without having to be subject through the same baseline savings targets that other ministries have had to be subject to?
Well, of course, it couldn't be subject to a baseline savings target because that would require it to have had a baseline in previous years. As a new ministry, it doesn't have a baseline to compare itself with. The second point is, yes, it does have each year for its first 4 years, a $2 million increment. As it establishes itself, it finds the staff. We could have, of course, started at 22 million, which will be its final budget, but we've chosen to start it at a lower level to recognise the fact that it takes time to grow its capability. For example, it spent its first year working on material which will be used to train others throughout the public sector to be better regulators, because often people say, well, it's not so much the rules we care about, it's the way they're applied. However, that's taken some time to prepare. In future years, there might be more scope to use those resources to better educate other regulators. So we've actually chosen to start lower than where we're going to end up, increment over time as we grow our capability to do good.
So are you guaranteeing then that the overall cap for the Ministry for Regulation in terms of what its final budget will be 22 million? It won't go over that.
No, that's for the first 4 years.
Do you expect it to grow beyond 22 million?
No, I don't have. You asked if I can guarantee it. I said no. I don't have any expectation for the simple reason that future governments will set budgets, and they might budget more or they might budget less. There's no reason to think that it would be more. There's no reason to think it would be less. But it would be unfair to ask me to guarantee what a government might do in 4 years' time.
Okay, I just want to remind members that the briefings that we get from the Office of Auditor General are in confidence, and while you may be able to draw themes from them. The rule is that we don't quote directly from them as such. Now I'm going to go to Dr. Megan Woods. No, you're all right.
Dr. Webb.
Okay, well, I might just, before you go, Duncan, I might just jump over this side to Todd Stevenson or Dan Bidler.
Todd first, and then myself.
Okay, Todd, and then we'll come back to Dr. Webb.
Good morning. Thanks for being here, Minister. Obviously, we've already touched a little bit on these regulatory system reviews. You said it's about a third of the ministry's work. At the moment, there's, I think, around 6 criteria that are kind of looked at when deciding on these system reviews, things like productivity and regulatory burden, economic opportunities, social outcomes, etc. Can you tell me what you've learnt in the reviews that have happened to date? And, will those criteria and framework be adjusted? And how is that informing the thinking of the ministry for the next set of reviews?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here. First of all, a lot of the changes that have been made, I don't believe would be made if the regulated party had to tell the regulator, because often the regulator is in quite a position of power over the regulated party. I give the example of early childhood centres. I happen to be the minister responsible for that regulator, and I can tell you that we've had to really work hard on ensuring that the regulator operates well and leaves the regulated party, the early childhood centre, in a comfortable position. Nonetheless, I believe in a lot of cases, the centres and the regulated parties would not have raised the concerns for fear of the regulator. And I suspect that that's just a problem right across the regulatory environment. You could say the same thing about just about any regulator. So being someone that the regulated parties can go to means that there is now an advocate for the regulated within government, and you won't get that from the people who are regulating them. That's a conflict of interest. The criteria that we've used so far, I think, have been very sound, and we'll continue to use the same criteria for the foreseeable future. As you say, we're interested in how big is the impact on the rest of the New Zealand economy, how big is the impact of regulation on that sector, and how plausible is it that we can make improvements that will show a tangible benefit. And so at some levels, you will see, for example, the hairdressing review, actually quite a significant sector. Are they badly over-regulated? I don't believe that they were. However, counterbalancing that, we were quite easily able to remove regulatory burden and make a difference quite quickly. So that is a success for that sector, and one where, for minimal effort, we have made sure that $1 million a year will be saved in fees alone, and probably a greater amount in the inconvenience of compliance. That means that sector review will basically pay for itself every year into the future. And it's a very good example of how this small but mighty ministry is one that is actually saving people money every year.
If I can.
Okay, we just had one sup there from Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you. I'm interested in the regulatory review process. Is it something you have input in as a minister, or is it something that the agency itself decides?
As a minister, I take recommendations from the ministry as to what sort of sectors we should consider, and I have some influence over that decision. I would describe it as a joint decision.
So would you say you have final sign-off on what the work program is for the regulatory reviews that are undertaken?
I wouldn't say that. It's a collaborative process. The ministry obviously gives me a lot of advice, and I take it very seriously. I guess in theory, I can just override things, but I think as a minister, that's unwise. Usually the people that are working full-time on a project will have very useful things to say, and you're wise to listen to them.
Okay, I'm going to go to a sup here from Ryan Hamilton.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Minister. With regard to your framework around early childhood education, the review you've done in that sector, alluded to the $1 million of saving, and obviously that compounds over time. That review wasn't without some noise from the sector, but what are the key, benefits or extrapolates you've pulled from that review, not just financially, direct and indirect, but some of the other wider benefits you think have come from the benefit of this intervention?
So you're talking specifically about early childhood? Yeah. So if I was to just start with a general theme, I believe one of the reasons we have a problem with productivity in New Zealand is that we spend too much time on what might be called transactional activity, not enough time on what you might call transformational activity. It's the builder who takes longer to get consent than actually build the thing. And it's the early childhood centre operator who says, look, all I wanted to do was release the magic of young New Zealanders. And actually, I spend far too much time on compliance activity, and in some cases, too much time fearing the regulator. So what we've been able to do is shift them, or will do as this review is implemented, is shift them away from unnecessary compliance activity back towards more productive activity, actually unleashing the magic of young minds in this country. Now, how does that work? Well, there's basically three things. First of all, the rules. We found that there were 98 licensing requirements. By the time we're finished, a significant portion of those will be either gone, simplified, or transformed to guidance. The second is the way that the regulation is done. For too long, it's been very high stakes. If you miss any of these criteria, you can be shut down, when in many cases it'd be more appropriate to have a system, and there'll now be a 5-step system of, well, here's a warning, here's a more serious warning, and eventually we will shut them down. If it's something very serious involving the safety of a child, we can still shut them down immediately. But a much more graduated and proportional response, and there'll also be some changes within the regulator to make them, I guess, more accountable and appropriate too. So it's what are the rules, how do we enforce them, and what's the structure of the organisation enforcing them? All of those will change and give us a much more constructive relation between the regulator and the regulated, prioritising child safety while also making early childhood centres a much happier place to work.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to.
Thanks. I'm going to keep looking at how the regulatory reviews are selected, because you've got one that you did in agricultural chemicals, and you've got a clear connection with the agricultural sector through lobby groups there and through your own members, and then another one's ECE. You've got a clear connection to a one-time funder of the ACT Party, and certainly supporter of right-wing narratives, right, and the Right Family Foundation. So there's a real concern that it looks like there's an appearance of regulatory reviews being chosen to benefit parties connected politically, right? How can we have confidence that the decisions are not politically influenced and are made entirely on the basis of where best wins and values for New Zealanders are?
Well, first of all, the idea that I've got a clear connection. I'm the most urban MP in New Zealand. My main interaction with the dairy industry is probably through a flat white. And when I go and visit,
well, one of your members was chair of Federated Farmers.
Minister answer. Yep.
When I go and visit farm animals, it's usually the sheep in Cornwall Park. So the idea that I've got some sort of clear connection, I've got no more or less connection with rural New Zealand than anyone else. Now, you're right. I represent a party that has very good policies for rural New Zealand and is very popular with New Zealand, rural New Zealand. That is true, and I'm sure that that hasn't escaped your attention. But frankly, the suggestion that I have any kind of conflict is completely improper. Secondly, the idea that we decided to do a review of the early childhood sector because someone may or may not, I'm not even sure, have donated to the ACT Party a long time ago is frankly fatuous. And while I'll tell you why we did do a sector review into early childhood, because it's a large and economically significant sector, because
my
it's a
question was
sector.
this: how can New Zealanders be confident that the sector reviews are chosen on the basis of best value for New Zealanders and not for political wins? Now, what I put to you is that you should have no part to play, that there should be no collaboration, and that should be a decision entirely within the ministry, because that's where you've got the expertise built up. And for you to then go and cherry pick, and I mean, is it the case that the agricultural chemical reviews was suggested by you?
So actually the agriculture and chemical was actually suggested initially by us because the primary industry, us as the Ministry for Regulation, I mean, primary industries is basically the backbone of New Zealand's trade. So it was one of the first areas that we looked at. So we actually brought it to the Minister first.
Well, okay, and thank you for, Ms. Moss, for that contribution. I guess then perhaps you could explain to us within the ministry how this process happens, because I am concerned. And if you could go through and I've seen I've seen your list of considerations, but what I want to hear is that there is no risk of political interference in the selection of review areas.
Okay, let the Minister respond.
Yeah, I think first of all, we really have to address this. The suggestion that there is some sort of improper interest is completely wrong. It's unparliamentary for the member to suggest
It's
it.
entirely within orders for me to talk about influence.
No, it's not. If you are suggesting that there's an improper influence in decision making, that is unparliamentary. The member's been a member of parliament for a long time. He should have read the standing orders. But I can be absolutely clear that there is a very robust process for choosing sector reviews. In this instance, as we've just heard, this suggestion was from the ministry itself. And when it comes to the idea that an elected minister should not be involved in decision-making in government, well, that is just undemocratic. Of course, people have a right to be elected to Parliament, to become ministers, and to make decisions. And it's not actually their right, it's the right of the New Zealand people to elect us to do so. If you seriously believe that that whole process doesn't work and that we should be governed by the unelected, then there's a few countries that you might find more comfortable. I won't name them now, but I'm sure you can guess.
Okay, we're going to go to Dan Bidwell.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister. One of your ministry's roles is around stewardship of the system. And the big focus in this government, as you know, is around outcomes. I'm just wondering if you can elaborate for us what does success look like in terms of stewardship of the regulatory system? Because I know you're a small ministry, mighty, as you've said, but what does success look like? Let's just say from 18 months from now, and then maybe for the end of the forecast period, 5 years from now.
Yeah, no, good question. So if you look at over the next 18 months, our primary objective at the moment is passing the regulatory standards bill, having those principles in place, and that legislation, I think, will really assist with the quality of regulatory impact assessment, something that even the opposition are asking for. We'll also continue to carry out sector reviews. So you may have seen we've recently announced one in the telecommunications sector, which has been crying out for some intervention, or at least less intervention, for a while now. And you'll also see us beef up our, capability work, where we help mentor and educate government workers on how to be better regulators. If you look at over the next 5 years, we'll see more and more of New Zealand's legislation and regulation aligned with the principles of good regulation. Knowing what problem we're trying to solve, what are the costs and benefits of the rule, do the benefits exceed the costs, and who do they fall on? How are people's liberties and property rights impinged, and are we upholding the rule of law? Having these basic questions gives people confidence to invest. It means better jobs. It means better pay. It ultimately means a more prosperous society. Those are the objectives that we should all share. And yet, from what I see today, it seems that only some of us do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And a couple more questions if I can. So I don't know if you have any examples of success stories of where your ministry is helped provide advice or to actually improve regulation from another ministry. I don't know if you can talk to anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of, we've talked about some of the big ones, but increasingly we see just really small things where people say, where do I go in government to report this problem? So, for example, the anti-money laundering regime was being applied to gift cards. So in theory, you had to trace somebody giving a gift card. This was really absurd. Gift cards are not a centre for organised crime. We have intervened and had that restriction removed. The people involved estimate that will probably cost them, save them about $7 million. So it's, it's not huge, but it's it pays for half a year of the ministry. Similarly, we've had concerns raised by a company that was being forced to test for flour dust in its bakeries. It turned out that there was no equipment sensitive enough to detect such flour dust at the specified level. So, we've intervened and had that changed. There was a company that was offering buy now, pay later. There were restrictions proposed on the way that they could recover their fees that would actually make their business model unviable because the regulations were really set up for credit cards. So we intervened, and that was changed as an option, and that's made that option of buy now, pay later, which a lot of New Zealanders value, more viable to stay in New Zealand. So those are, I think, three little examples. And through our red tape tip line, we've, I think, had about 600 people come through now. So we're constantly looking for these smaller areas as well as some of the larger ones, such as I think I mentioned, the hairdressing, the early childhood, the telecoms, the ag hort, and so on.
Thank you.
Just to up on there.
I've got a couple of subs lined up. You're happy for Duncan to take that one?
Look, you've said on a number of occasions, I want to give you an opportunity to correct that there were flour dust regulations. Now, I've seen the documentation. There were never flour dust regulations in force that required the 10 part per million test. The consultation from MB was whether the flour dust test should be changed from 1 part per million to 10 parts per million. So, and yet, time and again, you've suggested that you may change the rule to make it go back. Do you want to correct that, or are you going to keep saying something which is not accurate?
Well, I think you could argue it's something that's not precise. However,
well, I would call it making shit up, actually.
Okay, hang
No,
on.
well, excuse me,
Order.
excuse me,
Order.
Mr. Chair. Can we just hear what this Labor minister has just said?
Well, I said you seemed to make up that you had changed a rule.
Why don't you say exactly what you just said?
You did. The ministry did have input at an early stage, and it said it would be untenable to change the standard. And MB listened to that advice.
Okay.
Took it on board.
I think the member should say again what he just said.
I think.
Look.
Not here to answer your questions.
I'm going to give Mr.
Well,
I'm
well,
going
no,
to give
you
Dr. Duncan Webb the opportunity to withdraw and apologise for his swearing.
The standard we walk by is the standard we accept in this parliament. We've already
I
established.
apologise for swearing.
Okay,
Thank you.
right.
Yes. So as I said, you could argue that it was imprecise, but the facts are that there was a regulation that would have had a huge cost if it was put in place. It wasn't, thanks to the Ministry for Regulation. QED, the Ministry for Regulation, has saved people in this country money quite a lot, and I think that's important.
Okay, we're going to go to Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the examples of success that you've cited to the questioning by the member, Dan Bidwa, it's been to do with reducing the sort of regulation that's been available on people. You've characterized it as, burdensome restriction to liberties and freedoms of New Zealanders. Why then did the Ministry for Regulation not submit against the benefit changes that this government is doing? For example, it's restricting the liberties of people on benefits. It's requiring them to have payment cards. I saw in the regulatory impact statement that the Ministry for Regulation didn't submit on those things. So is it just a matter of a selective application of freedom on those that already have quite enough in society and not applying it towards our most vulnerable?
Look, thank you. That's actually an excellent question, and I think elucidates some of the misunderstanding in politics in New Zealand. You see, the thing is, a benefit is not actually a right. It's somebody else's money that is taxed off them and given to another person with a set of conditions. And the taxpayers who have the money taken off them, they do actually have the right to put conditions and mutual obligation around the receipt of that money. That is quite different from a person who owns some property, for example, perhaps their land or their section, having restrictions placed on that. For example, can they build a house on it? So there's a very big difference between the process I described at the beginning of this session, taking money off people and then applying it to public purposes, in this case benefits, that is taxing and spending, and that is overlooked by the Treasury. On the other hand, there is the process of placing restrictions on the use and exchange of property. And the difference is that a benefit is not your property, it's someone else's money that was taxed and given to you.
So you're essentially suggesting that there's two classes of New Zealanders. The people who have property should be able to have more rights than the people without property. That's essentially the implication.
Well, I'm not aware of any New Zealanders that don't have property. Remember, property includes your money, it includes your possessions, it includes real property such as land and buildings, it includes your car if you have one. I know some of you Greens don't like that, but actually every New Zealander owns property to some level, and the ownership of property is the surest pathway out of poverty towards prosperity. That is why it is so critical that we have a framework that upholds people's right to use and exchange private property.
If you don't know anyone without any property, Mr. Seymour, I suggest you get out of your Epsom bubble. But let me just follow up with...
Didn't you stand against me in Epsom?
No.
Oh,
that's
sorry.
Lawrence Dunan.
Okay. Let's get back.
I'm often confused with my better looking.
Okay, one more stop, and then we're going to go to Dr. Woods.
I'm sorry. I thought you had.
I'm so flabbergasted by that exchange that I forgot my supplement.
Well, you're both so studious and articulate. It's an easy mistake to make.
Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Megan Woods.
Thank you, Minister. I'm interested in this line of questioning we've got around how it is that we're going to measure progress of the ministry and impact. Going back to the discussion you were having with Dr. Webb around the flour dust example, am I right in assuming then that the Ministry of Regulation is going to claim as wins things that could have been? So as has been established in the select committee process, you said it was not precise language, others would argue incorrect language, to claim that there was a measurement for flour already occurring. In fact, it was only under consultation. My question is,
I can answer your question straight away if you like.
You can answer that, but I'll have some supplementaries.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely, because one of the ministry's key roles is to improve the process of making new rules. So yes, we absolutely intend not only to measure improvements to rules that already exist, but also improvements to rules that might have been made. I would say that they're equally important.
So what analysis are you putting in place to ascertain whether or not a normal consultation process couldn't have picked that up? In fact, it was revealed through MB's consultation process that that was not going to be a tenable standard. So what is the cost benefit analysis that the Ministry of Regulation is doing on its own work, and what could be achieved far more cost effectively in other agencies?
Well, again, if you look at the reviews that we've done, the benefits that they deliver are vastly greater than the entire budget of the ministry. Now, you could, of course, argue that if the ministry didn't exist, then regulations might have improved through other processes. The fact is that they didn't. And I suspect one of the biggest reasons for that is that once you put in place a specific process and say, right, we're going to go out, we're going to listen to the people who are regulated and say importing agricultural and horticultural products. We're going to have someone within government making the case for them that, actually these rules are wrong and need to be done differently. And often, and Grania will tell you often that, they have quite, shall we say, robust conversations with regulators about, no, I think these regulated parties are right, you need to rethink this. So if your question is, can you exactly apportion a dollar figure to how much?
No, that wasn't my question.
I don't think you can. But
the question was whether or not the Ministry of Regulation will be doing cost benefit analysis on its own work vis-a-vis alternative ways of monitoring regulation. My question is for you, Minister.
Yeah, well, so to the extent that we can easily point to savings that are a large multiple of the Ministry for Regulation's budget. Now, you could argue that.
So you will be doing CBAs?
Well, no. What I'm saying is that you can point to dramatic savings from.
So no CBAs. That's all I needed to know. Just in terms of the $17
no.
million.
I'm also explaining why why?
No, that's
Okay.
fine. We've got limited time. Just wanted
Okay.
to clarify whether or not the Ministry of Regulation would be submitting itself to its own cost benefit analysis.
Well,
We've told
that's
us
a
no.
different
But in
question.
terms of the
If you'd like me to
$17
answer that
million
question, I
that you've
can.
already spent,
Okay.
Minister, you've already told us you won't be doing international benchmarking.
No, that's not
Sorry,
correct.
my questions are for the Minister. You've already told us you won't be doing international benchmarking with other agencies in response to earlier
Well, I
questions.
haven't said that.
What I want to know then, have well, you've made claims to this committee that your ministry is achieving things that international comparators have not. What advice have you received around our ability to benchmark against those international agencies?
Okay, let's have the Minister to answer.
If you need to constantly paraphrase and claim that I've said things that I haven't, then I think the public will make up their mind who's being misrepresented here. Second of all, if I can just refer, it is nice to be polite to our guests. And Grania would like to address a question you just made, so I'll give her that opportunity in case you'd like it.
Particularly around international benchmarking.
Okay, yes, but with all due respect, Minister, this is the time for the select committee to question you as Minister. If you need your officials to step in for you.
But it's
that's
rude.
I mean, I just think we're going to make a great video of the behaviour of Labor MPs on this committee, and I think people are going to decide whatever happens next year, we don't want them back over here.
Okay, let's put it to the Chief Executive.
Well, I'll make it very quick. I think, first of all, the range of work that the ministry does is quite varied and significant, and that's appropriate because the regulated parties all have different pain points. It might be interesting for the members to know that of the tips that have come through the tip line, 70% of people have told us they have not raised these issues with previous government departments. So it's a really good opportunity to hear about pain points. It would not be a good use of taxpayers' money to analyse everything and do a full CBA on it, but there will be cost-benefit analysis done at appropriate levels across a range of our work. Internationally, we have been reaching out and people have been reaching out to us. Our model of working is actually slightly different to many of the other international players. And that's because we're actually doing things and been given levers by government to either stop not helpful new regulations and improve current regulations. We will continue, because it is only our first year, to work with those international people, learn from them and benchmark where appropriate.
Okay, I'm just conscious of time. We're in the last 7 minutes. I'm going to go to Jamie Arbuckle, New Zealand first.
Thank you, Minister. We had the Productivity Commission. I know you're an advocate to wind that up, and obviously that got wound up and the money basically went into the Ministry of Regulation. That's my understanding of how that worked. Could you give me like the differences between the work that the Productivity Commission did and the work the Ministry of Regulation is doing?
Certainly. So first of all, the Productivity Commission was in operation for about 13 years, I think. I could be out a year there. It had an annual budget of approximately $10 million per year, and it produced, I think, some very fulsome, very high quality reports on quite a range of issues. I would argue that successive governments, regardless of which side, didn't really take advantage of the reports to the extent that they could. I think some of what the current government is doing around housing is guided, at least indirectly, by the excellent work that was published by the Commission in around 2014. However, in general, I would say that huge reservoir of work by the Productivity Commission is still there, and still there to be used by governments should they choose. Now, we could have continued with the Productivity Commission. They could have produced a lot more of these reports, but what we wanted to do was actually have a department that brings about real change. And so, as I've mentioned today, in the first 15 months or so that the Ministry for Regulation has existed, we can point to a large number of tangible changes to policy that have come about. And that's because we're not there to produce reports. I mean, the ministry does produce reports off its reviews, but that's a very small part of its business. Its mandate is to be a central agency, to participate in government policy making, to improve the standards of regulatory impact, to help pass bills, to conduct sector reviews, to triage red tape tip line. All of these are actually directly making changes in government as opposed to producing policy reports.
Okay, I'm going to go to someone who's been very patient, our member online, Ms. Karpakingi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Minister. I would like you, if you would, to explain the 0.5 million that was spent by your ministry on the urgent Waitangi Tribunal claim, Minister. If you could explain what that was spent on, why it was spent, what it was spent on, and what why are we better off because that was spent at all?
Well, it's certainly a very good question. Frankly, we spent it because we're required to by the law. The tribunal, as I'm sure you know, is a standing commission of inquiry. It has the right to call people to make submissions. If you're called, then you need to pay for legal representation. The ministry was forced to do that, and we did so. What benefit that brought? To be honest, I think the member asking the question might be better to ponder it than me.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, that's right. We're going to go to a final primary by Dr. Webb.
Yeah, look, I'm interested in the Regulatory Standards Board, and I guess it's appointed entirely by you, and the legislation as it stands doesn't really provide any guidance as to the qualities needed. And I guess I'm concerned that given the close relationship that the ministry has with the New Zealand Initiative, and Bryce Wilkinson in particular, that in fact, I mean, he has interviewed employees. Your chief economist was appointed, he was on the interview panel for it. I believe he was on the interview panel for the chief executive. I've got hundreds of pages of emails to the chief executive from him, and to other staff within the ministry. I guess my point is this: are you just going to appoint to this board regulatory economists like Bryce Wilkinson, who essentially have a political axe to grind?
Well, a couple of things there. First of all, I don't appoint the board if the bill is to pass Parliament.
That's actually what the bill says, but I know the cabinet procedure.
Yes, well, if you know cabinet procedure, then you'll be well aware that the bill provides for cabinet to appoint the regulatory standards board.
The bill provides for you to appoint them, but I understand the cabinet procedure, which is you would get your cabinet colleagues' approval.
Yes, so that's not really me appointing them because the other cabinet colleagues could veto a decision or approve a decision. It was seen that they're making the decision. So you either understand cabinet procedure or you don't. The second point I would make is that, you know what, Duncan, you got me. I admit, have been taking advice from one of, if not New Zealand's best regulatory economists, and he's been giving it to us entirely for free because he cares about public policy.
Well, not only that,
it is that bad.
It
really is that bad.
But someone from a lobby group called the New Zealand Initiative has been sitting on interview panels for public service.
Well, first of all, they're not a lobby group; they're a think tank, and it's not and it's not unusual. It's not unusual for an expert, an outside expert, to sit on an interview panel. It's a normal public service
lunch dates and coffee catch-ups.
I beg your pardon?
And yes, lunch dates and coffee catch-ups.
You've got us again. Yes, we have been having lunch and coffee. You've got us.
Yeah.
Red-handed.
Okay, just Todd Stevenson.
Quick supplementary, Minister.
Top of the hour.
It seems Dr. Webb's very interested in the regulatory standards bill. Would you welcome opportunity to come back before the committee and talk specifically about that bill?
Oh, if there was an opportunity for me to talk about the regulatory standards bill, I would be there with bells on. I think it's one of the most important things that the government has introduced to Parliament. I think that it has the potential to greatly improve New Zealand's standards of living by giving voters more transparency about the rules and regulations being made. And, if people would like to talk about the regulatory standards bill some more, then wow, that would be fabulous.
Okay, let's draw a line there. We started 5 minutes earlier, so we'll finish bang on 10 o'clock. Thank you, Minister.